Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live webinar with Jeff Sanders. Jeff is a very popular keynote speaker, and he's the author of the best-selling award-winning book on productivity, The 5 a.m. Miracle, How to Dominate Your Day Before Breakfast. He's also the founder of the Rockin' Productivity Academy, and his podcast, The 5 a.m. Miracle, has reached #1 on iTunes and has over 5 million downloads. So we're really excited to have him with us today to teach us how to be extremely productive. If at any point during the webinar you want to ask Jeff a question, you can just submit it through the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We also have a chat box, so if you want to submit a comment or something, feel free. Jeff will get to all of the questions at the end, but just feel free to submit it anytime you think of something is perfect. Jeff, if you want to take over from here.
Okay, I can do it. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It should be a lot of fun today. We're going to talk a lot about productivity, a lot about waking up early, although I'll get to kind of my speech on that one. It's not a requirement by any means. But yeah, today should be a lot of fun to talk about productivity from a lot of perspectives. I have a couple of philosophies that really dictate how I live my life and how I teach these principles to others. So I'm hoping that you today can actually, spend a few minutes here taking some really good notes and figuring out ways for you to be really your best self. And that's what this is all about, is being your most productive self so your biggest goals in life can be achieved. And so I think we'll just jump right in and begin this process. Okay. All right. So yeah, this discussion today is called Productivity Miracles. And so we're going to talk about what it means to achieve a productivity miracle. And I think this whole kind of thing kicks off for me. There was a story that has really stuck with me from last summer. I was at a conference in Chicago about podcasting, and I had planned for this conference for a long time. And I got there with my plan in place. I had got the work done before I got there. I had postponed work till afterwards. And yet the whole time that I was at the conference, all I could think about was the work I wasn't getting done because I was traveling. And I was talking with somebody after one of the sessions, and I got distracted in the middle of the conversation. I had to pause, and I was like, listen, I'm not listening to you. I can't focus because I keep thinking about all this other work I want to get done. And he was like, that's a problem, Jeff. You shouldn't have so much on your plate that you can't even be present at a thing you chose to come to. And it was a real kind of eye-opening moment for me. And I realized that I need to live a life that is not only productive, but one that is balanced and one that has focus when it's time to focus, but there's also a sense of margin and a sense of really making sure that you don't find yourself overwhelmed with all of the work you have to do so that you actually can be present when it's time to be present. And so right now, if you're listening to this, you are taking some notes, hopefully excited about changing your life. But my guess is there are things on your mind, things in the back of your mind you're not doing, things you could be working on. And so think about those things. Think about that philosophy, that perspective that, why would you feel that sense of urgency or stress around the work you're doing? And part of the reason why is because there's a balance that can be achieved that's not being achieved today, one that would allow you to be present when it's time to be so. And so today we're going to discuss a variety of strategies to make that possible so you can actually engage in the work you're doing in a really great way. So let's just jump in with this, that I believe you can achieve what matters most every day, that there are a few key things that matter, and that if you identify what those things are and you get those few things done, then you have this great sense of accomplishment, and the stress and the overwhelm of having too much to do can be alleviated to the point that you actually enjoy the work you're doing, and you have the margin built in, and your life has this great sense of, yes, I'm being productive, and yes, I have time to relax afterwards. It's the work hard, play hard mentality that life can achieve that sense of balance, and that really, for me, is what productivity really looks like. This is a picture of a guy, it's not me, he looks similar to me. His name is Zeddy Little, and he became famous about 5 years ago on the internet. His picture went viral. He is known as the ridiculously photogenic guy. And so what happened was that he ran the New York City Marathon. And if you've ever run a marathon before, I've done them many times. And I can tell you that in the middle of a marathon, there are photographers and there are people taking your picture and video. And generally speaking, you don't look that great. You're stressed, you're tired. It's a lot going on in the middle of a marathon. And for some reason, Zeddy Little, this guy in the picture, took a really great photograph. And he looked wonderful. And his picture went viral because everyone's like, this guy somehow managed to pull off an amazing picture in the middle of running a very difficult race. And I thought about this picture and realized this is what it really means to be productive. This is what it really means to be living in the moment and experiencing what's going on around you, and to the point that you're not super stressed out about it. When I think about productivity, I think about achieving my own productivity miracle. I think about doing work that I love, work that is difficult possibly, but work that I'm good at, and enjoying the process and being able to smile while it's happening, as opposed to feeling just intense overwhelm or stress around it. I've had pictures of myself in marathons. I don't look this good. That doesn't happen. I generally don't look that great. But it can be achieved, right? We can prepare for the work we're doing to such a degree that when it actually shows up, when we're doing the work that matters, we can do so and feel great in the moment doing it. And our whole life can, for the most part, look like that. And so when I think about kind of becoming my best, I often think about this picture and Zeddy Little and the way he was able to pull off a great marathon. And so think about that for yourself. What does it look like when you are doing your best work, and how can you feel your best when it's happening? Now, today's discussion for the large part is going to revolve around kind of my view of productivity from the perspective of waking up early. I was not an early riser. I grew up as a kid, maybe around like age 9 or 10. I had a pretty rigid schedule and was pretty good at getting up early. But once I hit the teenage years, my schedule was all over the place, and I never really committed to any sense of waking up early until my mid-20s. So what happened was that I was working a full-time job, and I wanted to build a side business. And that side business is now what I do full-time. But I had a full-time job, 40 hours a week, commuting back and forth, building a side business. And at the time, I was training for a marathon. And I looked at my schedule and realized I'm never going to get all this stuff done in a single day. I don't have time to train for the race, to go to work, to actually do my job well, to build this side business. If all three of those things every single day are going to happen, something's got to give. I can't continue the schedule that I'm working with. And so I shifted to an early morning schedule. I decided that one day I was going to wake up at 5 a.m. Because it made the most sense for my schedule to get up at that time, to have time for a morning run, and then to prepare for work, get there on time, and then work on the side business in the evening. And the first day I tried it, I was blown away. I was just madly in love with early mornings on day one, because I found this real sense of calm and peace in the morning. No one was awake. It was just me out there on the road running. It was very quiet, very serene. I was focused. I was in the moment. I was living a life I felt like this is sustainable. I could do this. I could wake up early, do the thing that matters most first thing, and then still have time later in the day to do other work that matters as well. And so that balance that I achieved on day one, I attempted to just recreate over and over again. And here I am about 5-ish years later, and I can tell you that this is a way that works. This is a strategy to simply say, I'm going to prioritize getting up at the ideal time that works for me to do the thing that matters most first thing. And so my own 5 a.m. miracle was really just came about out of kind of the mess of my schedule. And so though 5 a.m. is by no means a requirement for you, think about what that could mean for you to wake up and do the thing that matters most right away, because that really is where a lot of your productive potential lies. One of the day job that I had back then in my mid-20s, I was at a career college, and I was working at the time as the school's registrar, which, if you know what that job includes, lots of paperwork. I mean, just tons of it. I had digital work, I had paperwork, I had file cabinets full of school records, because as the registrar, you're in charge of basically everything that happens in the school that involves paperwork. And so there's a lot of details to manage. And I volunteered for that job. I opted into it because I thought that I had a skill set that would fit that job. And I did, but I didn't have enough of those skills. I found myself being quite overwhelmed with the amount of stuff I had to work with. At the same time, my boss was way, way worse than I was. I would go into her office to kind of have a meeting or a check-in, and her desk was a hurricane. There was just stuff all over the place. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe this is just how this works. This is just how you do work. You just have to have a messy desk. Well, then that boss left, and when her new replacement came in, my new boss somehow had a miraculously clean desk. Super, super simple. I mean, it was miraculously clean. And I thought, there's something here. It's two different people doing the same job, but one of them is doing it in a very different way, which means there's a possibility here. There's potential to do the same work differently and do it better and be more organized, less stressed out, and ultimately get a whole lot more done a lot faster without having to feel overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that's there. And so I adopted similar strategies and turned my own desk into the same scenario to make it look great, to have it simple paperwork, simple piles, very clean and efficient systems. I really focused on asking those tough questions of how can I clean up this mess? How can I not live in clutter all the time? And in that process, figure out a way to be more streamlined across the board in every area of my life. Without those systems, without streamlining, without doing the work that matters to clean up the mess, you will find yourself burning out. I did that just earlier this year, that I overbooked my schedule. This is a story that I'm actually going to be telling in my next book, but one that I shared on my podcast before, which is that I ended up in the ER. I actually had to go in an ambulance to the hospital because I had a full-on panic attack because I had overworked myself. And I teach productivity skills. Like, I should be the guy this doesn't happen to, but it happened to me because I'm overzealous, because I'm an overachiever, because I take on too much. I say yes way too often. So don't think of me as kind of like the guru on the mountain teaching these strategies. Like, I am, in many ways, just like you, trying to figure this stuff out myself. And the thing that I think has allowed me to really make a difference in my own life, especially in these last few years, is the keen self-awareness around when a problem shows up, what am I going to do about it? How can I make sure this never happens again? And I can tell you that my tendency, my addiction of anything, is overwork. It's just taking on too much. And so I'm teaching you these skills, but I'm also listening to myself talk today because there's so much to be learned about how to do the work that matters without doing too much, so we don't find ourselves burned out, so we don't find ourselves in a position where the things we love to do and need to do take over our lives. So we're going to regain control so we can prevent those problems that may show up. So the questions today we're asking ourselves is, how can we actually avoid these things? How can we avoid overwhelm, or even trying to just get caught up on your work because you're behind in what you're trying to do? But then ultimately, as things move forward, you want to feel more in control, possibly even to the point where you're thriving and feel like you've got this. You know what you're doing, and you're doing it well, and you don't find yourself in those positions where you're missing the margin or the balance you're looking for. So what is the solution then? I mentioned the 5 a.m. miracle. I've mentioned waking up early. I've mentioned the sense of balance. But what does it really take to actually get to that point that things are working the way you want them to work? Well, the way that I see it is that the clarity you're looking for, the simplicity, actually comes from the mess. Like as my example earlier pointed out, we had a really messy desk, and then somehow that messiness turned into a very clean and organized desk. Well, that's a very visual way to see a messy problem, but a lot of our problems aren't quite that visual. Maybe it's your calendar that's a mess. Maybe it's a project list. Maybe it's just you just feel out of control. Well, somewhere in the middle of the chaos of every single day, there's clarity. There's a sense of simplicity. There is a solution somewhere buried under all that stuff. And so our goal is to find that and make sure that takes center stage so everything else can just fade away. This is a great quote that I love from Albert Einstein, one I actually have on my vision board here in my home office. It says, "Out of clutter, find simplicity. From discord, find harmony. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." And I feel like that's what this is, right? In the middle of challenging things, there's a solution there. If you are feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like there's too much work, if you can pause even for a minute and think about, where is the opportunity in this? How can I grow and improve? Because there's going to be a lesson here. Like, I literally have this quote posted on my home office vision board because I need to see this every day, because I get caught up in busy work. And I need to ask myself, like, what's it going to take for me to find the solution here? How can I get myself out of this so I can move forward more efficiently with more systems that work well? So today we're going to discuss 5 steps to your own productivity miracle. So this is a great chance to take notes if you're not started already. So get your pen and paper, or Evernote on your laptop, whatever you're using. This is a great chance here to take some notes as we dive into what it's going to take you from possibly an overwhelmed scenario to one that's a lot more streamlined. Step 1, we're going to define those few things that actually matter most. And this is, of all the things I'm going to say today, maybe the most important thing. There are only a few things that matter most. And if you don't define them, if you don't know what those things are clearly, your chaotic schedule will continue to be chaotic. And so the key is to figure out what those few things are and to make sure those things get your attention and nothing else does. One of the things I think about when I'm thinking about the most important things is what has worked well in the past. I'm the kind of guy that runs marathons. I like to climb mountains. I like to explore nature. And so when I think about like my ideal life and when things are going well, one of those things I think about is I need more of a sense of adventure in my life. I want to go do big, fun things, things that allow me to explore. And if I'm not doing those, well, then I'm not allowing the few things that matter most to actually take center stage in my life. So this is a good chance for you to ask yourself those questions. And one way to do that is to create what I call a personal optimization plan. What that is simply a plan that says, when my life is going well, here are the things that are happening. Here are the things that I'm doing. Here are the few things that really make my life just hum at a beautiful rhythm. There's a guy named Sean Stevenson who he's a little guy. He's only 3 feet tall. He has a heck of a life story. He was born with a bone disorder that causes his bones to break frequently, but he has overcome that in so many ways. He's now a public speaker, an author, and a phenomenal, phenomenal man. And he has what he calls a when life works list. And so for him, it's very similar to this. It's asking, when my life is working, what is it doing? Where am I? Who am I with? What work am I doing? What fun am I having? And when you define those things clearly, you have a greater sense of, this is the direction I want to go. Here are the things I want to make sure have space on my calendar and time in my life. That could be time for a personal goal like running. It could be family time. It could be business building time. Whatever it is that means the most to you ends up on this very simple plan of, when my life is working, here's what I'm doing. Step 2 is to cut everything else. This is the hardest part. Of all the work you're going to do, letting go of things is tough. But for me personally, this is where I experience the most joy because I love to cut stuff. I love to clear my calendar. I love saying no to things because it makes me feel so much more in control. Like all of a sudden, time just showed up, free time just showed up that I never had before. And so this is a fun process if you can allow yourself to say no to things, which it can be tough depending on your personality type. So one way that I help to define that for myself is asking the question, is it a 9 or a 10? No? Well, then I walk away. And this is also posted on the vision board I'm looking at right here because this is an important question for everything that pops up. If someone invites you to a party, if someone asks you to go to a meeting, if a new project opportunity shows up, you have to ask the question on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best, is this new opportunity, this new thing I could say yes to, is it a 9 or a 10? And if the answer is no, it's not that great, well, then you should say no to whatever that thing is. And if you do this consistently, every single day, practicing the skill set of doing this, then what your calendar will end up displaying are just 9s and 10s across the board. And you're going to look at your calendar and say, these are important and amazing opportunities. I want to spend my time on this stuff. My calendar is exciting to me now. It's not overwhelming. And so these kinds of questions will really give you the chance to filter what opportunities show up to know what matters and what does not. Another great way is from a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and he phrases it this way: if it's not a clear yes, it's a clear no. It's the same idea here, and think about it through that same lens. If I can't definitely say yes to this, then I'm definitely going to say no. And that will really help you to, once again, filter what matters and what does not. One of the things that I have struggled with in my life is saying no by default. In other words, if the first answer is always no, then you're going to give yourself the best chance to keep your calendar clear for the sense of margin, for the important projects. This has been a thing I've been practicing the last few years, is when I've email templates I've created. So when someone asks me for something that's consistent, someone says, hey, I want to be a guest on your podcast, or I want to be, blah, 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 so let's work together. Whatever the thing is, my default answer, and a template I just copy and paste in to respond, the answer is no. Like whatever the opportunity is, the answer is no. I may go back later and say yes. I've done that a couple of times, but the vast majority of the time, my answer is no, and that keeps my life so much more simple. And so adopting those policies is just, it's life-changing. It really is. Because ultimately, our goal is to do less. Like that has to be the answer. Productivity is actually not about saying, how can I get more done? That is a very common thing to think about. And I've discussed this before many times as well, that we want to get more done, but we want to get more of the right things done. And the only way to do that is to do less of everything else across the board. And so getting more done is just more of what matters. And that's it. And if you end up spending more time doing things you consider to be nonsense or just extraneous distractions, then that's what your life becomes: nonsense and extraneous distractions. And that's not a life worth living. That's a life of stress and overwhelm because the petty stuff has taken control. And so we want to figure out a way for that not to be the case. Number 3, once we've defined those few things that matter, we've cut a lot of stuff, well, then our calendar at this point, theoretically, is available to schedule those few things that mean a lot to us. We now have a chance to actually put those things into place to make sure that what we have said yes to gets a centerpiece on our calendar. One way that I do this is with an ideal week template. This is very simply an Excel spreadsheet that I have that gives me a visual of what the week could look like. And so I just define, Monday through Sunday, here are the days of the week, and here's some major blocks of time that I typically go through. The first things you may schedule are exercise, going to work, maybe your kids from school, like whatever the thing is you're going to go do that is going to happen. But really you're asking yourself the question, if my week flowed as beautifully as possible, if everything was exactly as I would love it to be, what would it look like? And this also is something I have posted on the vision board. This is a theme here because I want to see what the ideal week looks like. I want to visually see if my life was operating the way that I would want it to. Well, here's how it would look. Here are the things that are on my calendar that are just organized and aligned in a way that is best for me. Now, in reality, you're probably not going to live out that ideal week very often. But if you have defined it and you know what it looks like, then your odds of living that out are significantly greater because when you schedule your time, you're looking at that calendar of the ideal week and saying, how do I match my reality with this ideal? How can those be as close as possible? And when that happens, your life becomes more ideal. Your schedule becomes more clear. The things that matter the most get your important attention. One of the other ways I love to kind of anchor in my most important stuff is what I call anchor habits. For most people, there's 3 anchor habits in your life that you tend to focus on, which is waking up, working out, and going to work. I use those 3 as examples because those tend to be things that, for the most part, most people make time for those on a weekly basis, right? You wake up, you're going to do that. So what are you going to do once you wake up? In other words, if waking up is something you always do, how can you wake up differently? How could you get up and do something that's going to encourage productivity and success in your day as opposed to doing what you've always been doing? This is how my 5 a.m. miracle came to be, was I just asked that question. How can I wake up differently? How can I take the habit of getting out of bed and just shift it slightly? Same thing with working out. When can I make sure that's guaranteed on my calendar? But then also, how can I work out more efficiently? How can I use my time more wisely? If I'm going to do it anyway, I may as well do it well. And so with that kind of an attitude and a thought process, all of a sudden you realize I don't have that many things I'm definitely going to do, but those that I am are going to be done really well. And that's going to give you such a greater sense of control in your day and opportunity to tack on some complementary habits to really enhance the work you're doing. Step 4 is where the 5 a.m. miracle really kicks in. And this is where you get the chance to dominate your day. This is a phrase I love to use because I think of my day as a thing that can be dominated. It may be a kind of a hardcore word to use, but really it's just asking that question, how can I make sure that I'm doing the things that matter and that I'm not distracted by the other stuff? So in my book, The 5 a.m. Miracle, I kind of break down a whole 7-step process to make sure that all of that is possible. If you want to get more details about this process here, my book is available. It really will break down for you more specifics around the routines, although I am going to highlight some of those right now. So the whole process really begins the night before. So if you want to have a phenomenal morning routine, if you want to wake up tomorrow morning and feel refreshed and ready, that process has to start tonight. And so your evening routine is your opportunity to really ask yourself, how can I stop my work for the day? One of the things that I did in the beginning when I said I'm going to do a 5 a.m. miracle was I have to get to bed by 9 p.m., which was pretty early for me at the time. Like, how do I fall asleep at 9 p.m. to guarantee 8 hours of rest? Well, the only way to do that was to have an 8 p.m. boundary. In other words, if I stop everything at 8 p.m. and say, I'm done for the day, no more technology, no more computers, no more work, no more distractions. I'm just going to take a shower, read a book, and go to bed. Well, once that was in place, my day had a stopping point. I could finish everything by a specific deadline, get to bed, and then I was able to wake up the next morning ready to go. And so for your own evening routine, you want to have that sense of clarity around when the day stops so you can actually wrap up the work and have a plan for the next day. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually plan tomorrow on paper tonight. So you're asking yourself, what's tomorrow morning going to look like? What are those key habits I want to have in place? And how can I make sure I write that down in the evening? So tonight's a good time to do that. Write it down. And the next morning you wake up and that plan is right there. You've thought about it already. You're going to follow those steps right in order to make sure your morning routine is fluid and it's pre-planned and you actually committed to it. And so your schedule can actually fit in that ideal sense that you're trying to achieve. So then your morning routine actually kicks in. So you planned it the night before, you've got it on paper. What do you do first thing in the morning? How does that work? There are a couple of different methodologies I recommend in terms of starting your day in the best possible way. My favorite way to wake up is to wake up and work out as soon as possible. That's the greatest jumpstart to my day that I tend to have. It's not a requirement by any means, but if you can prioritize an early morning workout, I find that to be the absolute best way to begin. If it doesn't start with working out, you could ask the question, what's the most important other project I want to do? It could be a personal project. It could be a work project. But pick something that you have not made time for, that's important to you, that if you could make time for, even just 30 minutes in the morning, that could change your entire day. Because if you wake up a little bit earlier, you get that time in on that project because there's no distractions because everyone else is still asleep, then you get that productivity. You get that time baked in. If you had just 30 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, you've just baked in 2.5 hours of time, 2.5 hours of real productive time in your week that you otherwise may not have had. And over time, that adds up very quickly. And then you find more ways to hack your mornings, more ways to be more efficient, to make sure that what matters most is getting done each and every day. I will say this here, just in case you're at all curious, 5 a.m. is by no means a requirement. It is a totally arbitrary time that works for me. I tend to lean towards 5 a.m. as my ideal time. If it's not ideal for you, then pick another time. It could be a 7:30 a.m. miracle. If you're a college student, it could be an 11 a.m. miracle. Right? Whatever the thing is that you want to choose, find your ideal time that allows you to wake up with intention, do the thing that matters most, and then to begin your day, whether that's going to work or doing your most important objectives at that point. But ask yourself, what is my ideal time to wake up? And if I did, what is possible in my day if I actually stuck to that time for the long term? Dean Karnazes is an amazing man. He is a very famous ultra marathon runner. So he has run crazy, crazy marathons and longer distances across the globe. He's run marathons on every continent, and he's an incredibly, overly ambitious guy. His morning routine is, I think, probably the most ambitious I've ever seen. And so when I tell you the story, don't think you have to do this. It's not a requirement, but this is an example of what your routine, excuse me, well, your routine could actually look like if you ask yourself, what is possible for me? So what Dean does is he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then he runs a full 26.2 mile marathon, and then comes back home, eats breakfast, and drives his kids to school. That's not every single day, but he has done that many, 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 many times. And it's just a way he wakes up early, he runs a long distance, and he starts his day from there. And so if someone like Dean, who has trained for many years, but can get himself to the point where he's running a crazy distance, full marathon before breakfast, what can you do? What's possible for you if you woke up even just 15 minutes earlier? Could you do 15 minutes of yoga? Could you write in your journal for 20 minutes? Right, what could you do that would start you on that path to doing what matters more, keeping in mind the ambitious potential of someone like Dean? Ultimately, the goal here is to connect the dots. You're trying to make sure that your daily activities align to your grand goals. In other words, if I'm going to spend time doing stuff every day, I'd rather the stuff that I'm doing add up to something. So if I do an activity, I want it to have a real connection to a grander life goal that I've set, possibly a bucket list goal or something you'd love to achieve. A simple example, if you wake up and you run 2 miles, that could be part of your journey to one day run your first marathon. You wake up every morning and work on your small business that all of a sudden later on becomes an empire. Like, we start with the daily activities, the simple, small habits every day that over time add up to major success because you have guaranteed a little bit of time here and a little more the next day, a little more the next day. And it's surprising over time how much that adds up. So if you're going to do stuff anyway, you're going to be busy anyway, you may as well be busy doing things that have potential long-term. Step 5 is the review process. This is probably the process that I actually probably enjoy the most because I get the chance to really reflect and ask a lot of tough questions about how I'm living. I mean, today is a good example of this. Me talking to you about your life and your schedule is an example of a review because you're asking those questions about what is actually happening. Am I too stressed out? Am I too busy? Does my calendar allow me to do my biggest goals or not? And if it does or if it does not, either way, you have the chance to improve. And so one of the ways I do that is with my weekly review process. This is an idea that I stole from David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, many years ago. It's a phenomenal process and one that has made a tremendous difference for me personally and for many people who've used it. All this really is a chance to pause once a week, maybe for an hour or two, to go through a simple process. These are examples of some of the things that I do in this list here. I do more than this, but this is where it really gets me started. And so the first thing you could begin with is just asking yourself, what are 3 things that were wins for the week? 3 things that went really well, that I'm proud of, I'm excited about, 3 positive things that happened. Next would be 3 things that did not go so well, 3 losses or failures or missteps, and then what you're going to do to correct those going forward if you still can. Then you would jump in with some aha moments or epiphanies you may have had, some brilliant new thoughts you had. Make sure you record those so those stick with you over time. Also take a moment there to actually reflect on gratitude and think about why my life is going well and to be thankful for those things. This will really help as well with the stress levels and overwhelm if you pause even for a minute to acknowledge the things that are going well. 4, I like to update my progress reports, which basically means I have a simple checklist for my goals I'm working on, and I'm looking at that checklist and asking myself, am I still on track with this goal or not? Am I still doing the things that matter or not? And as you move through that checklist and as you're getting things done, once a week you're pausing to make sure it's still up to date. And then finally, I make the plan for the next week. So I'm asking myself, if last week was whatever it was, how can next week be better? How can I make sure that those few goals I have identified are going to have space on my calendar and I'm going to be able to make progress on those? And so with that in place, you have a clear sense of, here's how next week is going to work better because I reflected accurately on my progress in the previous week. I then take this whole process here of a review and I kind of take it to a higher level on a more a bigger picture scale. So once a month, once a quarter, once a year, I will go through the same process, those same kind of questions I just asked, but I will also tack on some bigger reflective questions. So am I who I want to be right now in my life? Where do I want to be long term? And is my life overall heading in that direction? Because there has to be a sense of kind of this crunch and release, meaning the crunch time is when you're doing the work and you're in the moment with the little details, but there has to be a sense of release or stepping back to ask, is that little busy work getting me anywhere? Or am I just a hamster on a wheel, the rat in the race? Like, am I just doing stuff? Or am I doing things that are telling a bigger story for me? Am I living that grand life I want to live? I think it's great to have time set aside in your calendar just to ask those questions because they lead to epiphanies. They lead to progress. If you have the time baked in to ask those just at all, just even asking the question at all will lead to results. There is a great method that I have used in the past, one that I think you could really actually take advantage of today if you wanted to. There's a man named Darren Hardy, who was the publisher of Success Magazine. He's a very successful businessman who has made lots of progress in many areas of his life. And his first career is in real estate. And he was very young at the time, like 19 or 20 years old. And he was trying to figure out, how can I not just be so busy? How can I do the few things that matter most in my real estate business to make more money? And he identified 3 things he wanted to do every single day, that if he spent as much time on those 3 things, he would grow his business. And everything else could be delegated or cut or just postponed till later. And by doing that, he said, well, let's time myself. Let's see how much time I'm actually spending on those few things that matter. And so he bought a stopwatch and hung it around his neck. And throughout the day, whenever he was doing that activity, he would start the stopwatch. When he was finished, he would hit it again. And then at the end of the day, calculate how much time added up over the course of this day of me doing those few activities that I said mattered most. And his first day, he got 20 minutes. 20 total minutes of the entire day doing what he claimed was the most important work, which was shocking and terrible. Like, how could you possibly grow your business if you're only going to spend 20 minutes a day on what matters most? And so his goal over time was to increase that number. from 20 minutes a day to 30, from 30 to 40, from 40 minutes to 70, or whatever his goal ultimately was. It was, how can I spend as much time as possible doing those few things? And so if you do the same thing for yourself, you have the chance to have the data and the numbers right in front of you that prove how much time you're actually spending on what matters most. So you can, over time, increase that number and make a whole lot more progress. So as a quick review of these 5 steps, once again, we began today with defining those few things that matter most. We cut everything else from our schedule because the other things just can't stay. Scheduling what matters to make sure those few things are guaranteed on our calendar. We then set morning routines and evening routines to dominate our day every day with the most important priorities. And then finally, a chance to review all of our progress to make sure that we're still on track with these few goals we have set for ourselves. I teach a lot of these same strategies in my academy called the Rockin' Productivity Academy that actually only launches 3 times a year. And right now it is available until next Friday, October the 20th. So if you want to check that out to learn a whole lot more about these strategies with more in-depth video trainings and exclusive interviews and some coaching from me, you have the chance to get that at rockinproductivity.com. So I'd love you to check that out as well. This is not a hardcore sales pitch. Just if you're interested, check that out. It's available for the next week. And as a final action step today, sell yourself on your own miracle, your own productivity miracle. And what I mean by that is that if you don't believe it's possible for you to overcome your current challenges, they're going to continue to challenge you. There has to be a switch in your brain somewhere at some point that says, I can do this. I have the potential, I have the skills, I have the opportunity. There is clarity in the middle of my chaos, and I can actually get there. But you have to believe it. It has to be a part of your DNA at some point to say, I'm going to be able to overcome this. And once you make that mental shift, it is incredible how much it allows you to then move forward and make so many dramatic changes. So start there this week. Think about this process and look at your notes later on, but really begin with just this: how can I make sure that I believe it's possible for myself to achieve what I'm trying to achieve? I end all my podcasts with this phrase because I think it's a very powerful one, one that really reinforces what it means to have that control you're looking for, which is that you actually have the power to change your life, and that fun begins bright and early. And that's all I've got. So thanks a lot for listening to me give a little talk. I've now would love to talk to you about some Q&A, some questions you've got. So, and yeah, now we can get to some questions. So let me jump into the chat window here.
Hey, Jeff, we've got a question from Julia. I know you mentioned this, but maybe just refresher for everyone. Do you go to bed early? What time?
Yeah, this is a key thing about the 5 a.m. miracle. If you set yourself, let's say, a 5 a.m. wake-up call, you also want to define the number of hours you want to get sleep. So if you say, I want to sleep for at least 8 hours, well, then you'd have to do a 9 p.m. Bedtime. So for me, my ideal wake-up call fluctuates between 5 and 6 a.m. And so I'll try to go to bed around 9:30 to 10 every night to guarantee I get the 7 to 8 hours of sleep I'm looking for. The times fluctuate based on my schedule because sometimes I have a late night and then the next morning I sleep in a little bit. But the question is, how can I make sure I identify the time I want to wake up, and then you backwards plan from there based upon the number of hours of sleep you want to get, and therefore your ideal bedtime will then be there. So my average bedtime tends to be 9:30 to 10, and that's if it's ideal for me, that works out well, but it does fluctuate.
Great. 9 p.m. That's interesting. I'll have to do that too. So Joe now is asking, with today's technology and communication, how do you find it helpful to block everything out to work on your most important items?
Great question. I have a strategy I call focus blocks of time, or FBOTs, and my FBOTs are really specific times where I block all distractions. In fact, right now I'm in one because I'm doing this webinar, so I'm not doing anything else. I'm not answering emails. I'm not taking phone calls. My dog is put away in another room, so he's not going to distract me right now. What that means is you're asking yourself, how can I block absolutely everything except the one thing I'm trying to do? This is tough. It depends on where you work. It depends on how you can get away. I tend to close my office door and lock it if I have to. What I actually go through is a 10-step process to make sure that I have all those things in place. So I'll run through that real quick. First thing I do is grab a snack or a drink so I have what I need for that focused time. Quick bathroom break. I put a sign on my door that says, hey, I'm focusing right now, stay away. I turn off my phone and my Apple Watch. They don't distract me. I light a candle because I think it's kind of fun. I then set a timer for the time I'm going to work. I turn on a program called Freedom, which the Freedom app is a way to block social websites or news websites or really anything you want to define. So it blocks Facebook, it blocks the New York Times, whatever it is you want to make sure you don't get distracted by. You can use that app to block those both on your phone and your computer. I turn on a program called Focus at Will, which is a music service that they design music for productivity. It's designed by neuroscientists to give you music that allows your brain to be optimized. So I turn that service on, so I listen to that while I'm working generally. I then put on some headphones and begin working. So really, it's just a simple way to say I've turned off whatever I can to make sure I'm not distracted, and then I get to work.
Wow, that's a lot of good tips. I like the Focus at Will website too. That's
A great one.
it's a good one. So this question comes from Zach. Jeff, what challenges did you come across while developing the 5-step methods?
Challenges I came across. Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is that everyone has a different life. I can give advice all day long of things that work for me, but they may not work for you. And so one of the hardest parts for me is not only figuring out what's going to work in my own life, which is complicated enough, but then how do I create things that other people can also, jump onto? And what the best ways to do that is you do your own self experiments. So you try a lot of stuff. 5 a.m. was kind of a random experiment. I just gave it a shot one day a few years ago. I liked it. I kept it. I've modified it a lot since then, but it's just figuring out how can I try some new things to make sure I'm finding what works well for me. And then once you do, you learn a whole lot more about yourself. You have self-awareness you can then use to make better choices long-term. So if you get off track, you can then refer back to, here are the things that work, and how can I get myself back to that as soon as possible?
Fantastic. So this one is from us69493. It's asking, do you have any suggestions for those who are not morning people? Oh, that's me. How do you get motivated in the morning?
You don't have to be a morning person to wake up early, but I think that this really plays into your energy cycles every day. Not everyone wakes up and bounces out of bed with enthusiasm and just tackles their day, right? Some people, my wife's a good example of this. She actually takes a solid probably hour to hour and a half to really fully wake up and get started. So she schedules her day in a way that allows that to work to her advantage. So if her energy cycle is going to be, let's say, later in the afternoon, well, then she'll schedule her most important work during those times that she has the most energy and the most time to get it done. And so that's the question you're asking. Like, when am I on fire? When am I really awake and alert and ready to work? And if that means that your best time is at 10 p.m., then you can use 10 p.m. If that works for you, then definitely use that. Most people, though, tend to have their most discipline, their most willpower, their most mental acuity in the early hours of the day. So if you want to schedule the work that matters most, for most people, even if you think you're a night owl, for most people, the answer actually is those first few hours. But just figure that out for yourself. You know yourself well enough by now probably to know what is your best time. But if you don't, just pay attention to that. How do you feel as the day progresses? What hours are you most awake? When do you feel a slump? And how can you optimize those hours so you actually do feel your best?
Great. That's good to know because I think I'm more of a night person as well. So it's good to know that I don't have to wake up super early. So Michaelina is asking, she's saying, thanks for a great webinar. I tried to wake up early and go to sleep earlier, but for me, it's just impossible. What would you recommend? Would you recommend to try harder or just the hour of morning wake-ups? I guess that's a similar question.
Well, it's really more of a question of, if you try something and it doesn't seem to work, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
I think that it comes into play of, number one, why are you waking up early? Because if you're waking up early because a guy in a webinar told you to do so, it's a bad idea. Right? You should wake up early because it means something to you, because there's an important thing you want to get done. So if you have not been doing something you really want to spend time on, well, then that's motivation to wake up early. I'll give an example of that. I was coaching a client who lives in Australia, and he loves to surf, and he hated early mornings, would never wake up early. It was the worst thing in the world to him. But for some reason, on Saturday mornings, he could get out of bed at 4 a.m. to go surfing with no problems. And because he was excited about surfing, that's what he really wanted to do. And so if you have that internal motivation to do something, you can overcome a lot of obstacles to get there. It's really about your why and knowing what matters. Because once you have that set, it somehow just magically works itself out that you can overcome a lot of stuff that you thought before was just impossible.
That's interesting. You could schedule the project you're most excited to do early in the morning, maybe get yourself up or the activity. That's neat. So I've got a question from H. Gonzalez saying, will we receive a link to the session via email? That's a question for me. We will be sending out a link where you'll be able to access the replay. If you join LeadX Academy, you'll get an information email next week about that. A question from Sean, what's the name of the app for the productive music? Again, I'm miswriting that name down.
Yes, focusatwill.com, just spelled out. Yeah.
Okay, and then here's a question from Bobby. How can I balance my personal goals with the needs of my family, my wife, and my kids? I like that.
A great question. And I think this is the entire process of rebuilding your own life is really the process of rebuilding your life in conjunction with everybody else you tend to interact with. Could be family, could be coworkers, your boss, your friends. That really is about conversations. It's talking to other people about what is ideal for you, what's ideal for me, and how can we find a compromise there that works well. One example of that is if I get out of bed at 5 a.m., I know my wife isn't going to bed until 7 a.m., I know I have about a 2-hour window right there where I can do what I want to get done before she wakes up and possibly could distract me. And so it's that figuring out kind of when are those windows of time that show up so I can get my work done, but also talking to your spouse, your children, the people you live with, but how you can manage everybody's ideal schedules in a way that works for the entire family or the entire office you're in, whatever the case is. You may not get your ideal. You may have to have some compromise there. But if everybody knows that we're trying to create something that's more efficient, you tend to find some really cool solutions there so that everybody really can get more done.
Great. That's great. So we've got just 3 questions left. If anybody has any other questions, submit them now and we'll make sure we get to them. Koru is asking, do you wake up at 5 a.m. every day or do you have a weekend wake up time that's different?
Yes, I do wake up differently on the weekends, mostly because of my schedule that changes. So I like to do like a long run on Saturday morning as part of like marathon training. So my time on the weekends will flex because of that, or if I schedule a vacation or whatever the case may be. My productive days generally are Monday through Friday. And so if I wake up early to do my work then, it's most effective. But I also have found that the more that I stick to an early morning wake-up call across the board, the easier it is to stick to, and the more likely I am to stay productive every single day. So I don't like the idea of saying because it's the weekend, I'm going to slack off, or because it's the weekend, I'm not going to set an alarm. I still set an alarm on the weekends. I still make sure I get up. It may be a little bit later, but I still want to be productive every day. I still want to make sure I'm prioritizing what matters. And so I think that if you have time built in for margin, and that's a good thing, but there needs to be a sense of consistency across the board to say that as a lifestyle choice, I'm going to wake up generally around these times so I can go do what matters most.
I like that term, lifestyle choice. You're really deciding to be productive in the morning and get up every day. This question is coming from Steve. How do you stop yourself being overambitious and planning your day when you have type A personality?
Well, that's my whole life. So it's a tough one. I think when you really want to do a lot of work, it is enticing to keep working. And so I think that one of the things that's helped me a lot is scheduling activities that force me to stop working. I'm in a book club I go to once a week. And so last night I had a book club meeting. It started at 6:30 at night and I didn't want to go. I wanted to keep working on a project I was working on, but I told myself I have to stop. I have to go to this thing. So actually scheduling activities that force you to walk away from your work can help actually balance out your life. It's figuring out kind of what your tendencies are and how you can override those. And so I know that if I'm overly ambitious, I'm probably not balancing the work that I'm doing with other parts of my life that probably need my attention just as much. And so when you actually go through that process, you realize, well, I could work a 12-hour day, or I could just work 8 hours and cut a lot of nonsense out of my schedule, which allows you to still get done what matters most, but then have the balance you're looking for to not be overly ambitious.
Great. This question's interesting from William. Are there any other apps that you love that help you with your productivity other than the Focus at Will?
I use the Freedom app as well to block distractions. I use Nozbe, which is my task manager. That's nozbe.com. They have a great task manager. It's like it's similar to Asana, which you may have heard of, or there's others out there that are like that. But basically what it is a way to manage your tasks and your calendar. I use Evernote, which I love to keep track of all my ideas and projects. Google Drive is one of my favorite things, keeping track of my documents. I have a whole slew of things on my computer right here I could talk about, but really it's just a matter of saying, I choose a few apps that matter the most to allow me to organize whatever I'm doing, but always with the idea of using the fewest number of apps possible.
Very interesting. I'm taking notes right now. You could do a whole webinar just on apps, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Uh, okay, so Julie is saying, I'm under ambitious. How can I become over ambitious?
I would not say strive to be over ambitious, but maybe you want to strive to be more ambitious. That could be a good thing. Really, that's just about asking yourself, what do you want to get out of life and what are you excited about? If you feel like you are lacking, the enthusiasm or the energy to want to live life, like I've had plenty of days that are like that where I feel apathetic or low energy or down. One thing that I know always tends to help me is to exercise more. So if I spend time working out, like today after this webinar, I'm going for a run. That helps keep my energy up, my enthusiasm up. It helps keep me feel more alive. And I actually am more enthusiastic about everything else I'm doing when I feel healthy. And so if you want to be more ambitious or feel like you have more control, I always tend to lean on exercise as a way to make that happen because it just always works. It always makes me feel better, which then allows me to then approach the rest of my life in a more productive way. So I would say, if anything, start with that and then see where that takes you because there's a lot of power in being really healthy.
Yeah, that is so true. The days that I exercise, I'm more productive, and it's always the first thing to go too. So
It
I think
is.
making it a priority could change everything. So, okay, two questions left. Here's from Lakeisha. What advice do you give somebody with a rotating schedule? So maybe they have, different work times on different days.
Yeah, an irregular schedule is very common. My schedule also bounces around quite a bit. And the answer there is it's not about saying I'm always going to get out of bed at 5 a.m. or I'm always going to do these specific activities. The answer there is asking what are the key things I want to make sure get done every day? And then when that new day shows up and the schedule shifts, how do I make sure this new schedule aligns to still with the priorities I want to get done? So instead of a 5 a.m. wake up call, it could be 9. Instead of 10:30, it could be 8. Well, it doesn't really matter when you wake up. It just matters what you do when you wake up. So it's asking what are those few key things I want to make sure get done? And how can I guarantee that with this crazy schedule, those few things are still getting done despite the fact that my schedule is not consistent? It is more challenging. It takes a little more intentionality and planning, which is why I think it's really important to have a strong weekly review process because you have to ask those questions. Like, because my schedule is kind of off the wall, how can I create more consistency as best I can and work within the parameters I'm working with? And if you ask those questions and you figure out what matters most, it's surprising how much more you really can get done, despite the fact that you might feel a little out of control sometimes.
Thanks. That's really good advice. So our last question's from Jay Mannequin. I'm struggling to follow a practice and make it a habit. Any tips for creating habits?
Well, habits really start with doing something very small and very simple and doing it over and over again. I mentioned earlier in the talk today about anchor habits and then complementary habits. What that really says is that you have something you're already doing. You're already going to go to work today. You're already going to wake up tomorrow morning. So how can you do that differently? And tacking on something small. So habits always begin with tiny changes, little tiny choices that then over time can stick and last longer. There's a lot of research on habits. There's a lot you can get into there, but it's about finding those things that trigger you to do something, whether that's having your floss next to your toothbrush, make sure you don't forget to floss, or something simple like that. It's figuring out what is the habit I want to do, what's going to trigger me to start that habit, and then what's going to guarantee I don't fall off the wagon and stop doing the habit I want to keep going. So it's breaking down kind of the psychology of what causes you to do things that you know you want to do, and then creating those reminders and triggers to make sure that you're going to get back to that over and over again. I use Noseby, my task manager, to remind me every day to do those things I want to start doing that are new. Whatever the thing is that reminds you, whatever the thing is you like to lean on that and make sure that that's what's going to keep you moving forward towards the habit you want to form.
That's a good idea to put it in your task manager. I like that. I'll be using that. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeff. It was very, very informal. I really like it. So we've got just one more question here, though, from George. Can you give us some more details on that Rockin' Productivity Academy before we sign off?
Yeah, rockinproductivity.com is the place to go to learn more about that. What it is, it's a monthly opportunity for you to connect with a community of people who also want to be more productive. There's a monthly training video where I dive into a new topic with a video training. There's an exclusive interview where I interview a high achiever. Kevin Cruz is on there somewhere. There's also a monthly coaching check-in. so that you're able to talk to me directly about the goals you're working on and ask questions about what you're doing. There's a lot of past recordings of other things that I've done also, so you get lots of access to bonus materials as well. But really, it's about figuring out how can you be engaged in a community of people who are trying to get more done, and then learning some lessons and going through the templates I've created to make sure that you've got the structure you need to be more productive. And the very first part of the Academy breaks down almost the entire 5A Miracle book with a whole video training. So if you want to really dive in deep, it's a great place to do that.
What was that address again? The web address?
RockinProductivity.com.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, everyone, and thank you, Jeff. I hope you all have a very wonderful weekend.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Later.